So on this one, I'm going to talk about, and this is like a real life experience, um, about adapting real life stories into a screenplay. So in the just the very basic sense, I got signed a contract with this production company to adapt a real life story into a screenplay. And this is something in one comment somebody asked about adapting, like writing adapted screenplays. Uh, I've done this like two or three times, but this is the first time I've done it like in a professional sense where like somebody contracted me to do it. Um, so it's all kind of interesting. I've done the book version like for a producer friend of mine. We were adapting a novel. They didn't have the rights for it yet, but they wanted to kind of get the ball rolling. Uh, and obviously, adapting a real life story, there's a lot of crossover, and there's obviously very two distinct different things with it. Um, so the first and foremost, when it comes to like the whole concept of adapting a book or a real life story, you have to decide how much you're going to fictionalize and how much liberty you're going to take with the story. Um, the Elton John movie that came out maybe like a year or two ago, they told his life story, but they did it in a sort of very fantastical way. So it wasn't so much like fictionalized, but it was more like theater. So like a lot of the experiences that he had, they sort of presented it in sort of in a more abstract form than just like a very straightforward like as it happened type of thing. So that's probably the one thing is like when you're adapting a book or a real life story or anything like that, you really need to figure out like how much liberty are you going to take with that material. Now, as far as me, I'm going to kind of focus on the real life, um, and just kind of give my experience to just sort of like everybody can kind of have an idea of like the inside of that, and also kind of give my insight of tips and ways to go about it. So I'm not going to talk too much about the actual story, um, but essentially it's a crime story based on somebody's real life who is an undercover cop, and actually not an undercover cop, like an undercover freelancer. Uh, he never worked for the police department, but they hired him as like a sort of like undercover for hire. This was back in the 70s when you can, I mean, it probably still happens, but when you can really get away with stuff like that. Um, so essentially, the first thing, obviously, if you're doing real life, you have to buy the rights. You have to do that for a book as well. But for real life, they had to buy the life rights from the family. Um, Now, going forward with that, with the story, um, we decided that it was going to be based on true events. So it wasn't a biopic about the under. It was based on his life. So we were taking the core elements of it and creating a fictionalized version of his experience as an undercover cop or an under. I'm just going to call him undercover cop because it's easier. As an undercover cop, and so that means some things that are in the script actually happened, some things that are in the script never happened. And a lot of that is for the sake of cohesion, storytelling, and also sellability. At the end of the day, you're not going to spend X amount of money buying the life rights so that when you make the movie, it doesn't make any money. So that's just a necessary thing of the business. Um, First and foremost, the first thing that I did was the producer provided me with some materials that talked about the undercover cop, his like experience, his uh, the particular case that he was involved in that we were writing the story about. And spoiler, undercover cop is no longer with us. He was murdered on the job. So obviously we couldn't talk to him, but we could talk to his widow, his kids, and we talked to them. And so it's a really interesting thing because you get like the family's whole like narrative of their father or of the person that you're writing the story about, and then you have the other narrative, which is like him as an undercover cop and certain files and reports and newspaper clippings about the whole thing. So you have to figure out a way to kind of mesh those together, which is why a lot of times when you watch a movie that's based on a real life or true events, a lot of people get up in arms like, well, it didn't happen this way. That was never the case, blah, blah, blah. And some of those things are justified, like some of those complaints. But you have to realize that, think of your life and how messy that is, right? You would have a trouble figuring out how to tell your life in 2 hours in a clean, cohesive way. So imagine having to take the life of somebody you've never met, where you're getting just all these different versions of this person and having to come up with a cohesive story. You're going to have to take liberties with it. That's why a lot of these like movies are called based on true events. It's not saying this is what it's happened, it's based on that. When it came to putting together the outline, was okay, we have all these things that happen in his life with his family, prior to him meeting his family, his undercover work, the actual case he worked on, the stuff that happened that got him uh, basically hunted down and killed. And so, how do you put all those together? And you come up with an outline where basically you just kind of do like a timeline of the person's life and you put all of that into the script. And what you have is a script, it's a first draft, but it's really just sort of like, okay, how boring, what are the boring parts of his life? And we're just going to take that out because now we have a script that just kind of tells his life or tells the person their events as they happen. Now we have to like cut a bunch of stuff out and figure out where the movie is in this. So with this particular project, when I wrote the first draft, it was a lot of family stuff, like a lot of family stuff, because that was probably the most information we got was from his family. We talked to them for hours and hours and hours. And the script was, I think, like 140, 130 pages. And it was basically a family drama. And so we sent the script out and to like some readers and to some other people, and it got it didn't get any like bad feedback or like exceptional feedback. It was just, oh, like this is an interesting script or whatever. But after that, the producer was like, this is not a family drama, it's a crime drama. So now we have to figure out all these family parts and remove a lot of it and replace it with the crime aspect of it. So, sort of the second iteration of the draft was going through and removing a lot of those family elements and adding things that never happened, such as like we had a whole, like we have two shootouts in the script. He was never involved in shootouts. But again, we're making a crime film based on this guy's life. So we're going to add those things, we're going to take out family aspects. And then after that iteration of the draft, it was taking sort of the real life villain of the undercover case that he was part of and making him more involved, because that particular person, the reality is in the whole aspect of this undercover cop's life, that person that was responsible for his murder really was not as deeply involved in the real life aspect of it as it is in the script. So in the script, we took that character or that person and we fictionalized their role to be a lot more villainous, a lot more involved than what we know on the actual like documentation of the things. So that's like another aspect of it. And had we written and just stuck to everything as the fact, you would have an interesting story, but in the reality sense of it, the movie aspect of it would be like kind of okay, like all right, like that's just what happened. And so when it comes to like adapting a real life thing, that comes into the other part where when you go through those iterations of drafts and you're fictionalizing things and you're taking liberty, it all goes back to the family. So now you have to re-engage with the family and kind of explain and justify, this is why we're doing XYZ, this is why we're taking this out, this is why, telling the wife, hey, you were in 60 pages of the last draft, now you're only in 20. So it's like you're having to, it's a very like what would be like the right word? I don't want to say like committee driven, but not even collaborative. It's just sort of like,
Iterative.
yeah, it's like very iterative. Yeah. And so it's an interesting thing because it's like how do we like methodically put this together in a way that it requires, it's sort of like a weird thing where it's very creative. It has a creative element to it, but adapting a screenplay, like Mike said, it becomes very iterative. And that's probably the most difficult thing that I learned and had to like really like be conscious of the entire time, because the script from the start of the first draft to the final draft that we just finished like 2 weeks ago, final draft, has been 15, 16 months. So it's been a long time. And we did send out another version earlier, and I made a video about it, about getting like rejections from those other ones. That was the same script. And after those rejections, we wrote a whole, like, not a whole nother draft, but basically like a considerable rewrite and revision, and which was even better than the one that we sent out last time. So, it's just it's in a weird, strange way, from a factual standpoint, it's strayed pretty far away from what the real life events happened and as they happened, but it sort of captures the more menacing spirit of that environment that he was in than what we had originally, which is kind of like a weird paradox of things. And I think ultimately with adaptations, and I want to go back to the Elton John one, I think with adaptations, it's not so much about being factually accurate. It's more or less being about like the mood and the spiritual accuracy of it. When you watch Elton John, like clearly when he was playing piano, he didn't float in the sky like he did in the movie. But that's what it felt like in that moment. And to me, that is sort of the really core aspect of like an adaptation, especially with a real life adaptation, is that the emotional thing needs to really hit closer than the factual thing. And I've done the book part, but I haven't done it in a professional manner. So the only thing I can talk about is books. Is you understand very quickly that with a book, it comes down to cutting out a lot of stuff. I mean, with a book, you have to cut out characters. You have to simplify so much, because with a novel, the novel writing is the wild west of writing. You don't have to follow a format. You don't even have to follow traditional story structure. You can literally write however you want, and as long as people fuck with it, if they like the writing style, if they like the characters, if they just like the way you write, like beyond style, like, you're good. But with screenwriting, it's like you have to follow a structure at some point. You can experiment and all that, but you can't just send a script that just isn't formatted, like right off the bat. Like, you have to automatically submit to some sort of rule. So with that, adapting books, I think one of the most important things is you need to figure out your character list first, and figure out who the most important characters are, and just be immediately cut out the least important ones. And then from there, just simplify the story as easily as you can. And then as you simplify it, you can add in other things from the book that work well with the simplified version to like beef it up. But yeah, I mean, as far as adapting a book, I would say just that's the most easiest, simple approach to do it. Hopefully in the future, I'll get hired to adapt a book and I can give more insight on that. But as of right now, just for like true life, real life type stuff. But yeah, real life events, buying the rights, talking to everybody that's involved in the real life aspect, getting the messiness of the real life together and creating a seamless story, then taking the methodical creative liberties to make it entertaining, and then being able to keep the family or anybody else that's part of the real life involved on your side as best as possible, so that they can be in full support of the end product that you come up with. And then also just capturing the spirit of what those real life events were like. Yeah, that's it. Dad hats on the website. Buy them. Workshops are open. And thanks for watching. More videos when I feel like it.